All right, as I said, it's my pleasure and privilege to be here, and it's going to be my pleasure to talk about an aviator that I really think is a really cool aviator that we should know more about. His name is James Norman Hall. He did a lot of stuff. We don't really hear about that too much. We hear about the other ones. He's kind of overridden by Eddie Rickenbacker and some others. But we will see what he's done down the line and how his legacy still carries on. All right. When we go through the museum, we like to tell people about, we like to connect things, one thing to another as we go through. Kind of make a nice coordinated tour. And I like to kind of show a lot of different things that are going to work off of this tour with James Norman Hall. We're going to also talk about Lufberry, Marr, the Escadrille per se, and the Lafayette Flying Corps. What they are, why they're different, and what they do, what they did. Alrighty, push this button. Well, first of all, let me go back and say, when I first went to basic training in 1957, I went down to Lackland and I had a bunch of civilian clothes and stuff, and I had to send it back. I said, send it back, and so I sent it back, and my parents said, do you want your stuff? And I said no, meaning I didn't need those clothes anymore, right? So they gave away everything that I had, everything, including my Japanese machine gun, my 1950s baseball cards, and a copy of Ace Trumpet, the comic strip, written by Eddie Rickenbacker. How many people know Eddie Rickenbacker wrote a comic strip? And it was later turned into a serial, you know, like the movies where something happens and then at the end, the movie ends and then you have to wait next week to see what happens. And you could get into the Ace Drummond group and you could get a little button, you know, Ace Drummond button and all that sort of stuff. So this comic strip was actually this thing done by Eddie Rickenbacker. He had also the Hall of Fame. That Hall of Fame was written about all different kinds of airmen back in those times, from 1933 to 1939. So in his Hall of Fame, he had people like Charles Lindbergh, you know, and Ernst Udet, even the Germans, and so many others like that. So it's kind of really neat. This comic strip was dated about 1936, and it shows James Norman Hall as a pilot. And then, as he is at that time still alive in Tahiti, writing books like Mutiny on the Bounty. Now, we're going to go into Mutiny on the Bounty a little bit. Now, docents can kind of wander back in and forth about subjects. What is, you know, and try to determine what is most important to people. What is most important for some to know? Some docents will think it is. Some will think maybe it isn't. But on my 11 or 12 years of doing this, I have had a number of people ask me, knowing about James Norman Hall, well, what really happened on the Bounty? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit. We're going to intersperse it. It's not sensitive about airplanes, but it's very interesting. And another thing I did is, how many people here have eaten breadfruit? Okay, so you got some people eating bread. So I brought in some breadfruit chips, and I'll bring them down a little bit later. Because breadfruit is very important. That's why the Bounty happened. So let me switch to the next one before I lose my train of thought here. Well, anyway, no, this thing was illustrated by Clayton Knight. Clayton Knight was really a great painter. Somebody knows him. Clayton Knight himself was an aviator who was shot down at the end of the war, at the end of World War I, in the de Havilland DH-9, and he became a prisoner of war. And then after that, he became a great aviation artist. You can look it up if you want to. Clayton Knight, a lot of good pictures. There's a fellow, you know, Bill Allen's museum. He's got original pictures by Clayton Knight. And if you say to Bill, I have a Clayton Knight picture, he'll get all excited about that. So there. Now, this is what the talk was originally called. It was called Connections, because I believe, again, as you go through the museum, there are so many things that can connect up. For example, you can start with the Spirit of St. Louis. And what are some of the connections that you can work into a talk? I won't say how each person should do it, but you know, there's Newport 28, for example, because Clinton Roosevelt was killed in the Newport 28, and Lindbergh took out of Roosevelt Field. All right, and then you can go down and you can talk about Hawley Bolus. He's all through the museum. hauling bullets. He did all kinds of stuff. I won't go into all of them, but you know, you get Lindbergh's wife to fly off of Mount Soldan and a glider, first class license, do a bunch of stuff like that. Now, my dad came back from World War II. I was a little kid, and he told me about the Pacific, and I became fascinated with the Pacific, Polynesia. I also liked aviation by that time. I was 7 years old, but I knew I wanted to fly or do something associated with airplanes. And I knew a little bit about, I didn't know anything about the 94th. But anyway, as I went along and I went to the University of Hawaii and did other things, I ran into other things like this person, Herb Kauai. I'm going to show you some of the stuff he did. Here's another weird kind of a connection, which we'll come up with Herb Kauai. But anyway, this is one of the docents back east. He said, why don't we do tours, and let's do a tour for, let's say, engineers. So when you go through the airplane, you know, this happens, or you can do a tour for any kind of a science business person. See if you can tailor your tour to their likes. And the first thing I thought about was Herb Kauai and the 94th, how I tie this Hawaiian artist to the Newport 28 and what's his name? James Norman Hall. Boom. So here's James Norman Hall, born 1887, died 1951 in Tahiti. Only 64 years old, had a heart problem. There he is standing by his span with the Lafayette Escadrille Indian on it. He graduates from college in 1910. I'll go this kind of, and he works as a sociologist for 4 years. Then he goes to England on a trip, 1914. He likes to write. He's there to look for writing and whatever. He goes to Joseph Conrad's house and he says, I want to talk to this guy. And he goes, pop, pop, pop. Goes to knock on the door and he chickens out. Doesn't do it. Then what he does instead is he joins the British Army in the Royal Fusiliers, telling them he's a Canadian. So what he does, he's in the Army for about a year, and he ends up at the Battle of Loos. The Battle of Loos was a battle where the British, essentially, some people said it was a draw. The British lost about 59,000 people, casualties. The Germans, 26,000. And as you see here, on the first day, 8,500 soldiers were killed, but only 2,000 were actually have a known grave. It was the first time the British used gas. And the first tactical bombing operations took place. Then there was the poet Robert Graves, who wrote, well, I put goodbye to all that because that's kind of for some people to know, that's a kind of a book about the war, British society, what he felt. But he also wrote I, Claudius. Anybody remember that I, Claudius series in BBC 1976?
Yeah.
About the Roman guy that stuttered and he kind of limped around. And, well, he wrote that as well. And Rudyard Kipling's only son, John, is killed at the Battle of Loos. Any questions so far? All right, so what happens is, December 15th, he decides to go back home. His citizenship he's discovered he's an American. When he's home, he writes Kitchener's Mob, which is, Kitchener was the guy that was the general head of the army then, British Army. And it's, as you see, an account of the Americans in the British Army. He did a really great job, so Atlantic Monthly says, why don't you go to France and write about aviation and the Lafayette Escadrille? So he goes, and October 16, he goes, and he meets these guys and they say, why just write about us? Why not join us? So he joins the Lafayette Escadrille. Now, the Lafayette Escadrille, there's the Lafayette Escadrille and the Lafayette Flying Corps. People are always getting them mixed up. And originally it was called the Escadrille Americaine, which didn't go over too well with people who were into neutrality. And then he called it the Escadrille de Volontaire. That's not a good name. How about just calling it the Lafayette Escadrille for the guy who helped us out in the Revolutionary War, good old Lafayette. About 200 more people became volunteers. Well, what happened was, after 6 months after the Escadrille per se, the Escadrille had 38 pilots. It had 4 French officers, 38 American pilots over those 2 years. After it got formed, some other people decided to come over, and they were called the Lafayette Flying Corps. They were directly assigned to French outfits, 1 to 2 to 3 pilots for each French squadron that would take them in. Well, I was going to say, when Hall joined the the British Army in 1914, he was 27 years old and had a college degree, and he was a private. So he survived the British Army as a private. Then what he does is when he joins the Lafayette Escadrille, he's got 30 years old now. He's an old pilot for the guys. And now he's a corporal, so he got promoted. So he's a corporal with a college degree. And that's what would happen. They would fly, they would be corporals and they would get promoted to sergeant. There were only 4 officers in the Lafayette Escadrille and they were French. Well, there was one, an American by the name of Thaw. He was the only American officer. So, bottom line, Lafayette Escadrille, 38 guys. For that period of time, Lafayette Flying Corps, about 100 to about 200 or more others that joined and were in regular French units. One of the things that he did, he joins, he gets there, he gets flying in June of 1917, he gets to flying, and what he does on his second mission, I think Hall's an interesting guy. He jumps in his Spad, he's going to take up, there's an 8-plane formation. So he jumps in his Spad and he jumps in his Spad to go ripping off with these other 7 guys, but his Spad won't work. So they got to tinker around with it. So what he does is he gets it fixed and he goes chasing off after him. And up ahead, after about 30 minutes, he looks ahead, there's 7 airplanes. And he says, oh, there's my group. And he goes after them to join them. Guess what? They're Germans. So he ends up in a 4-plane dogfight. And he ends up getting shot in the shoulder. His goggles shot off, and he gets shot in the shoulder. Loses consciousness, and either God or him or somebody else, it's down 14,000 feet. He lands instead of hitting the ground, he lands in a trench, lengthwise. And what it does, miraculously, it puts all the stress on the wing. So when he crashes, he comes out all right. In a sense, he spends 3 months in the hospital, and then he writes a book called, I lost the name of it here.
I would be.
Yeah, it's called High Adventure, the narrative of air war over France. That's what he does. Now here's where they got they essentially got their logo idea from this Savage Rifle advertisement. The first logo was the Seminole Indian. The second logo was the Sioux Chief that you see that ended up on most of the others. Now here are some of the airplanes that they flew. The Newport 11, which we have downstairs. The Newport 17, the Spad 7, which we have. These Spads, they sort of got Spad 13s at the end of the time. And the interesting thing about the French units is they called the Lafayette Escadrille N-124 when they had Newports and SPA 124 when they had Spads. So the Padron-based airplanes had CA 124 something in their logo in there. One of the people who flew in the Lafayette Escadrille was Gervais Raoul Victor Lufberry. Real quickly, I'll just go over. He was born in 1885. What he did was, his mother died when he was young. His father goes to the United States when he's 5 years old. He's reared by his maternal grandparents. Then he does a bunch of traveling around the Middle East and Germany and all that. Then in 1906, he heads for Wallingford, Connecticut. And at the same time, he's jumping on the boat for Wallingford. His father's jumping on the boat for France. So they kind of passed in the night. So Lufberry and his brother end up going to Wallingford, and his father goes to France, and they never see each other again. But anyway, what he's there, he worked in a silver plating factory, then he joins the Army in California and San Francisco, he goes to Hawaii and then the Philippines. And in the Philippines is when he gets his citizenship. He's naturalized. In 1912, he gets discharged and he travels in the Far East, and in 1912 in India, he meets a French aviator by the name of Marc Pour. How many people have heard of Marc Pour? Okay, good. Well, okay, good. Show of hands, one. All right, that's good, because I never heard of him until I started doing this thing. And it turns out he's a pretty important guy, because he's the guy that Lufbery met in India and got him interested in aviation. Lufbery became his mechanic. What Mark Port did was he learned to fly a Wright Brothers airplane in Australia. Then he came back to France and he flew across the English Channel and back to France in a Blériot, and he did it without any boats underneath. Back in those days, they wanted support in case they went down. But he had a lot of faith in himself when he did that. He flew over, came back around, and that was kind of a first. Then he flies with Lufbery a mail trip from Cairo, Egypt to Khartoum, Sudan, down the Nile River. It's about 1,250 miles. Flies down there, and it took about 8 days and 6 different stops. He joins the French Air Service in 1914, and unfortunately, as the sign says, the war clips his wings. He goes off flying one morning. They said, you shouldn't be flying. It's frosty and cold and snaky, and don't do it. But he goes off and he does it anywhere. And the last they said, they saw his airplane uncontrollably falling out of the sky. And he gets killed along with his observer, Mark Port. Well, that ticks all Lufbery off. Lufbery was his mechanic. Lufbery got on as his mechanic in the French army. And Lufbery really had a lot of respect for this guy, so he gets all ticked off at the Germans, and he decides he's going to go fly, and he becomes, of course, part of the Lafayette Escadrille. And the airplane downstairs we have with RL is for Raoul Lufbery. And what he did is he stayed there for all of the time the Escadrille was in, and then he really was a favorite of, he liked to fly in whiskey. They had two whiskey and soda, the two lions. And whiskey was the friendlier of the two. He was the male. Soda was a female, and she was kind of bite people. Now, I'm not making any disparagement. That's just what. So he liked whiskey a whole lot. He was whiskey's favorite friend. And unfortunately, what happened is when the Escadrille folded up, whiskey and soda went to the French zoo. And in the winter of one year, they died because the French zoo wasn't a really very good zoo. And so they died for his whiskey. He goes over to the 94th Squadron when the Lafayette Escadrille folds up in February of 1918. And he flies, he had 16 airplanes that he shot down with the Escadrille, supposedly. I was going to say, just, I don't like a whole bunch of numbers, but anyway, in the Escadrille they flew 3,000 hours. They shot down 33 aircraft, although it kind of varies. 9 people were killed in action. Some died in accidents, and one guy was killed when a horse fell on him. And
at what altitude?
pretty close. He was supposedly known to be a kind of a wrangler cowboy, and he went out to work with this particular horse people were having a problem with, and he found out why they were having a problem with him. Anyway, so in the Lafayette Flying Corps itself, Lafayette Flying Corps and the Escadrille, supposedly 69 people were died, 42 were actually killed in action.
Did all these people have to speak French?
They didn't have to speak French, but they did pick it up. And some of them, when the Lafayette Escadrille was formed, these guys were all college. Most of them were Yale, Harvard, coming from lettered families and everything else. There were a few unlettered people in there. Lufbery, for example. There were 2 Frenchmen, Lufbery and a guy, Didier Masson, and but most of them were pretty learned people, and they got along in French okay. He flew at the 94th, and he really wasn't very good at administration. And he was assigned, what they did is they assigned him to try to write a training manual for how to fight airplanes. And he became a squadron commander. He didn't do all that well administratively, so they put him back where he was good. He became a flight leader, and he shot down, I guess, 2 more airplanes. And then in May of 1918, he was chasing a German observation aircraft, and he was shot down, shot his thumb off. They said that, and the airplane rolled over, and he fell out of the airplane. And there was some contention as to whether he actually, he said that he could. First, he said he wouldn't jump out, he wouldn't fly a burning airplane. Then he said he would, that he would jump out of it. Then another statement was that no, he said he would know how to do it, how he slide slip and get away from the fire. Whatever it was, they thought he had jumped in this airplane fast, took off, chased this German observation plane, got shot, he rolls over and falls out of his airplane. And he lands on a fence right here, which people memorialized there at his service. So that was the end of Raoul Lufberry. And then old Eddie Rickenbacker and Clayton Knight eulogized him in their comic strip. So here we have, so I wanted to relate some of these guys to our airplanes. So here's number 6. Number 6 belonged, according to here, belonged to Kenneth Marr. Kenneth Marr, what he did was he lived in California, he's born in California, he goes up to Alaska, he starts running Malamute dogs, and then what he does is he goes over to France and he brings all these dogs to the Vosges Mountains, as they call it in France, and in that part of France. He makes 4 confirmed kills as a major after he serves in the Lafayette Escadrille. He shoots down, I think, 1 aircraft in the Lafayette Escadrille. I think it's 1 aircraft in the Lafayette Escadrille. Then he goes and makes major. He's not a really popular CO. Some of the Escadrille people weren't. He gets relieved, sent home, relieved because of his injuries. He's sent home, and he ends the war here in San Diego in a gunnery training organization. He then works in the movie industry with John Ford, marries a movie star, gets into the oil business, does well, buys a sheep farm in California, retires comfortably in Arizona, and he passes away in Palo Alto in 1963 at 78. So that's gives you a little bit of a heads up on what number 6 did. The Escadrille was disbanded in February 1918, and a bunch of pilots get, sent to the 103rd Aero Squadron. Hall is commissioned as a captain, transfers to the 94th. By the way, the 94th is trying to decide on a logo. So they come up with this guy, Major Gene Huffer, who was an old Lafayette Flying Corps guy. Says, I had a hat on my airplane, American hat. Why don't you take that and put it on airplanes? And then a little bit later, when they flew their first patrols, the squadron surgeon says, well, I guess our hat's in the ring now. That's the story, and that's how supposedly hat in the ring came about. Now this is a picture, here's where the connection starts to come in between the Hawaiians and James Norman Hall and the Lafayette Escadrille. This is a painting of Jimmy Hall guiding Eddie Rickenbacker to his first victory. James Norman Hall, what he did was he was a flight leader. Some people said he was a wing commander, but he was a flight leader, and in his flight was Eddie Rickenbacker. So this is Hall 17, and this is Rickenbacker 12. If you notice in the case downstairs, there's a case, there's a SPAD that belongs to Rickenbacker. Well, he'd been in the outfit long enough, so the SPAD has number 1 on it. Anyway, so you'll see that in the little case of models down there. So this is, now the person who painted this, we'll see, his name was Herb Kwai Cunning. We'll see about him in a second. So what happens was, Hall loses the fabric on, he's chasing a German airplane, and he loses the fabric on the wing, upper wing of his Newport. Now this used to happen It happened about 6 times. Newports were noted for having fabric come off of the wings or having fires in their engines. But they were a good little airplane. They were replaced by the Spads in the summer of that year. But anyway, make a long story short, he's flying along chasing this, fabric comes off of his wing, he comes tumbling back, trying to get back to base, and the German anti-aircraft shell hits his engine, but doesn't blow up. But he's down anyway, and he's a POW. And there's this famous picture of him with his dog, not his dog, a German dog, as he's being carted away after his broken nose got fixed. He ends up in this castle in Landshut, Bavaria, along with three other American airmen. There were more in there at one time. There were more guys in there, but it was down to this 4. And what he did is they gave him books to read, and he became very refascinated with Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. This old book had a little thing in it that said, I dedicate this book to somebody, giving it to, dated 1843. So it's a book that had been around, lots of little inscriptions in it. So when the war ended and he left, what the guy did, there was only 4 of them, what the guy did, who was the head of the prison, was he just said, take off, I'll write you a letter. He's a nice guy. Take off, I'll write you a letter, and be sort of a passage if you need it. But they had to dress up in their American Air Service uniforms. That's all they had. So they dressed up in their American Air Service, got on a train in Bavaria during the war, the war was ending, and headed south toward Lake Constance, Switzerland. And they went across the lake. But anyway, Canterbury Tales is going to come in a little later here. Connection. Anyway, he gets out of prison, takes the train to Lake Constance. After the war, he meets Charles Nordhoff. Charles Nordhoff is another author. You'll see Mutiny on the Bounty was written by Nordhoff and Hall. While he's in, trying to get this here. Yeah. This will come later a little bit. Anyway, he meets this Charles Nordhoff. They write a bunch of books together. One of them being the Bounty Trilogy. They write Falcons of France, some other things. Nordhoff, he marries a Tahitian woman just like did, Hall. But he becomes kind of depressed and everything. Comes back to California. And he kind of dies alone in Santa Barbara, California, 1947. And unfortunate, but he and James Norman Hall wrote about 30 books altogether. Some of them are now in movies and stuff, and some of his connections kind of linger on. There have been 5 Bounty movies. Now we're going to go and we're going to talk about Mutiny on the Bounty, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass out this. I'm going to just put these out here. These are breadfruit chips. Now it's not really like the real. I'll just put one in either. Now these are like the breadfruit is kind of a bland thing. When I lived in Hawaii, we used to like to eat it just because we were in Hawaii playing the game, and. The importance of that I'll come up with here in a minute. Anyway, there have been 5 Bounty movies made, and you can see they had Charles Law Clark Gable. Earl Flynn was in one of the first ones. He became a famous actor, of course. Trevor Howard, Marlon Brando, Anthony Mel Gibson. 5 of them. This is one of the. Here's Bly. This is portrait. Pardon? Oh, this is Bly's portrait. Nobody knows what Fletcher Christian really looked like. Christian was the leader of the mutineers. So here's the bottom line. Here's why the bounty occurred. Breadfruit. The British had slaves, servants, in the Caribbean. And what they wanted to do was to increase their food intake, and they thought breadfruit would do it to supplant the food that they had. So they mounted an expedition on the HMS Bounty, which was 91 feet long, 24 feet wide, crew of 46. Not a big boat. And they took off what they were gonna do when they got to Tahiti was they were gonna put all this breadfruit in here. So the already cramped quarters with food, and pigs and dogs and everything else was gonna be even more cramped. Water was gonna be rationed. What they intended to do was they took out of England, and their intention was to go to Cape Horn, South America, and then across to Tahiti. But what happened was they got down here and the weather wouldn't let them through. They spent 30 days trying to get through. That's a 12,000-mile trip. It would take about 4 months. And they would get there when the breadfruit was ready to plant, to transplant. Well, anyway, they didn't do it. They spent 30 days here, then they turned around and they went all the way around the bloody world back to Tahiti. So guys are getting a little bit antsy about that whole thing. Well, when they got to Tahiti after all that time, Tahiti wasn't a bad place for an R&R. It had, and the British sailor was a little bit higher status in Tahiti than he was in downtown London. Plus, they had another amenity. The ship's botanist said that the Tahitian girls didn't care how nonsensically the British sailors' features were arranged. They still loved them. So that was another reason for wanting to stay in Tahiti a little bit longer. They stayed for 6 months, then they take off, things get to a head, I won't go into all detail. About 3 weeks out of Tahiti, they have a mutiny, they put Bligh and they put 18 guys in this 23-foot launch, and he begins a 3,600-mile journey across the ocean and in the meantime, they throw all the breadfruit off the boat. So here's what happened. They came in from this way from England, then they started here, then the mutiny occurred. Bligh went this way, 3,600 miles in an open boat. Only one person died, and that was one of his crew members who was killed on an island by natives. In the meantime, Christian's looking around for a place to go. And he ends up going around here. He takes some people back to Tahiti. He takes some of the mutineers that didn't want to stay as mutineers. He took them back to Tahiti, and then he goes looking for a place to go. And he had to worry about not finding a place where the British would come and not finding a place where you have trouble with natives. Pretty hard to do. So he sees in Bligh's journal, there's an island called Pitcairn, and it says that there's high island. It has trees. It looks like it has good soil. It doesn't have any people. And it has a bad coastline, so people wouldn't land there. So he thinks, hey, gee whiz, that'd be a good place to go, right? So he heads for Pitcairn Island, and there's Pitcairn Island. It really exists. And he has 9 mutineers and 6 Polynesian men and 12 women. So that's 9 and 6 is 15, but 12 women. Do the math. That was, they had a little bit of tension on Pitcairn Island. Actually, what happened was, and this is the main town, Adamstown. And it's about like if you walk from here to the sports cafeteria, sports bar, the main part of it. Then there are little houses strung out around the rest of the island. It's not a big place. 50 people live there. It's, let's see, it's, and another thing about, what else was interesting was when he got there, he found out that Pitcairn Island had been mismapped by 200 miles. So now they had a lot of stuff. People wouldn't, they could live there, they had soil, food, water, and it was mapped in the wrong place. So if somebody's going to look for them, probably wouldn't find them. Now there are 50 people there. They have a flag from Pitcairn. There it is, Pitcairn Island flag. It was named after the first mate of the ship Topaz, which, the ship was named after, the British ship Swallow was named after the midshipman who saw the island. His name was Robert Pitcairn. Another connection, sort of like you want. His father, Major John Pitcairn, turned out to be one of the British officers who fired the first shots at Lexington against the colonists, and his father was killed at Bunker Hill. So, you know, had a little interesting tie-in with that. So right now you have 50 people on Pitcairn Island. It's the least populated national jurisdiction in the world. It's administered by New Zealand, and it's a New Zealand supply ship comes every 3 months and helps bring some. They make money by selling shirts and things and stamps, and I have some Pitcairn Island honey right here. I'll sell you some honey if you want it. And the best part of this whole trip, I'm spending too much time in this, but the best part of this trip was we had to wait 30 minutes on the cruise ship to be able to get on the island. You can't always get on the island. Sometimes it's hard. And during that 30 minutes, I got to sit with and have a private conversation with Brenda Christian, who was the descendant of Fletcher Christian. Kind of neat for me, and better than the Eiffel Tower, I thought. But anyway, what happened to Bligh? Well, Bligh was acquitted of a court-martial, and making a long story short, he served on a bunch of ships, became a vice admiral. He did get breadfruit back to the Caribbean, but the people in the Caribbean Puerto Rico loves it, Cuba feeds it to their cattle, had a mixed reception. And anyway, when he died, when Captain Bligh died, Lieutenant Bligh, he finally made vice admiral, they put a breadfruit, and some breadfruit on top of his grave at Lambeth. So now you know what happened for the bounty if somebody happens to ask you, maybe more than you want to know. So what we ought to do is, if we want to take a field trip to another museum, what we ought to do is jump on Air Tahiti out of Los Angeles, fly southwest about 8 hours, and we'll be in Tahiti. And in Tahiti is James Norman Hall's house. It's house and museum. It's a really nice little, like a French colonial house down there. And this is a library where he wrote Flying with Chaucer. Now he took that book Chaucer with him. And one day he was in there trying to brush the book off, get some of the mold off the book, and he decided he'd write about his experience in the prison, and also a little thing that maybe all of us should do, a little treatise that says something about our lives, so that when you die, and 25 years from now, people hear about you, instead of going by hearsay, you'll be able to pick up something that's, authentic that you wrote. So that's what he did. He wrote the book called Flying with Chaucer, right here. I have the book. When you walk through the house, you see there'll be a national there. You'll see some diplomas. All of a sudden, these diplomas start popping up things, and you end up, and there's a museum room. And this is the James Norman Hall Museum room in his museum. It's like a big bedroom. And there's this Lafayette Escadrille tunic, and his American Air Service one, airplanes that he flew or fought against. Pictures on the wall. Here's that picture of him in the car with the dachshund, and a picture of over here of the airplane that's down. But also, I saw on the wall, now I liked this guy, Herb Kawainui Kani. I liked him, but I really didn't realize that he had a connection with James Norman Hall. And I look up on the wall, and here is that painting done by this guy, Herb Kawainui Kani. So he liked airplanes. He was born in the mainland. He was a Hawaiian. His father was Hawaiian and his mother was Haole, as they say, Caucasian. And he went back and forth between the mainland and Hawaii. Great artist. What he does is he becomes but he liked airplanes, and one of his heroes was Richard Baum when he was growing up. So what he does, I won't go through all of this. What he does is he becomes an artist, and he works in the advertising business. And after a bunch of years, he gets kind of tired doing that. And so he goes to Hawaii finally to live. He would go back and forth between Hawaii when he was a kid. He ended up being in what they call a Polynesian Voyaging Society, where they helped design this canoe called Hokulea. Oh, one of the reasons he eventually left the mainland and came to Hawaii, besides his urge to build Hawaiian voyaging canoes, is that he got tired of painting dog food, tractors, all kinds of things you would do as a commercial artist. And he especially got burned out trying to draw the Jolly Green Giant. So what he did is he came to Hawaii, and these are one of the kinds of the paintings that he did. This is Hokulea. Hokulea is the ship that was the first Polynesian voyaging canoe to sail across Polynesia in 2,000 years. He does a whole series of that, and if you want to get his name, Herb Kane, and look, you'll find Herb Kane canoes, you'll find a wonderful series of canoes that he drilled. One of the pictures he also drew was Hall's first victory. James Norman Hall shooting down his first German airplane. Actually, that was his first airplane, and it was the last airplane shot down by the Lafayette Escadrille. It was in January of 1918, so Hall did that. So you can see Hall's done a bunch of interesting things you don't normally hear about. Here's this picture of Richard Baum, a painting of Richard Baum's P-38 shooting down a Japanese airplane. And the connection here was at the Udvar-Hazy, we had a P-38J, we also had a Newport 28. So, a little bit of connection. Here's this Hawaiian guy, paints these wonderful pictures of. Now, we still live, James Norman Hall still lives in entertainment and such. He was a big storyteller, and it turns out one of the movies I saw when I was a kid that I remember was High Barbary, where it's the story about a PBY that gets shot down after a kerfuffle with a Japanese submarine, and it goes down, here's the PBY. We have a PBY. Also in the movie was a Ryan ST. And the movies were shot in the local area. So this is kind of a carry down of James Norman Hall, some of the tradition of his communication. Let me take a drink of this stuff. Now this is kind of a stretch, but his storytelling goes on because his son, Conrad Hall, was, he made many, he was chief cinematographer for many movies, and he won 3 Academy Awards, and one of them was for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Now, I was going to say that earlier on, but I guess I forgot to do it. And then, of course, his grandson, Conrad W. Hall, his son, is still doing stuff. So you see conventional people in the news for that particular genre of moviegoers. Is the Lafayette Escadrille still commemorated? Yes, it is. This is a memorial to the American volunteers in the place the United States and France. It has the names of the Foreign Legion people who died in France and the American people who flew with the Lafayette Escadrille and Lafayette Flying Corps. And kind of has a connection with, I think, maybe Ron, because Ron's a musician and he likes to write stuff. And the model for the statue was Alan Seeger, Pete Seeger's uncle. He was killed in July 4th, 1916 with the Foreign Legion. And he wrote a poem called I Have a Rendezvous with Death, which John F. Kennedy liked so much that he had his wife read it to him all the time. Well, let me hurry up, I know I'm running late. Commemoration still goes on, Lufberry still goes on. This is Raoul Lufberry III, who lives in Wallingford, Connecticut. Wallingford has a Lufberry Street, a section of highway, a park, and a VFW hall named after Raoul Lufberry. Here's a ceremony where they were dedicating all of that kind of stuff over time. So Lufberry lives on in that. Does the squadron live on? Yes, it does. This is Fighter Squadron 2, Escadrille Squadron 2, 4th Wing Lafayette, and they're now flying Dassault Mirage. Right after the escadrille went to the American group in 1918. It stayed, we took their logo and everything else, and then in 1920, they came back with and said, we're gonna have our own squadrons, carrying on the tradition of the Lafayette Escadrille. So what they did is they had, and there's a bunch of airplanes that have been in it, P-47s, P-40s, Corsairs, Spitfires, Vampire jets, all been part of this squadron fighting in Libya, Vietnam, all different places where they fought Indochina. So the Lafayette Escadrille continues. Does 94th continue? Yes, the 94th continues. The 94th flies F-22s out of Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Last but not least, finally, is an honor to James Norman Hall, where the Congress made a resolution to honor him. And so this is a congressional resolution. And that, long story.
Okay, there's one little thing. You mentioned that the escadrille squadron, the modern one, flew Corsairs. The Corsair that we have painted up like Jerry Coleman's airplane came from the French Air Force. It's an F-4U-7. So that will be one of the escadrille airplanes. So thanks a lot.
Okay.
Chuck, and
My pleasure.
any questions?
Yeah, quick question. When did Hall first learn to fly? Did he know how to fly before he went to France, or did they teach him over there?
As far as I know, he didn't. And what he did is he learned in 1916. He went over in October, and it took him about 7 months, going through the training. No, he learned there,
All in France then, right?
all in France.
Thank you.
He did. On his last flight, on this book here, he writes about his last flight, where he comes back after the war's over, and he gets in a SPAD, flies down France, and he's just astounded by how beautiful it is, and he's not looking to get shot down, and he flies over town and he remembers where he saw a French three-seat observation plane going down in fire, and the gunner jumping out with his clothes on fire. So it's just kind of like his reverie's a little bit interrupted by that, but and then he goes into eating, he writes all his books and stuff.
And these are some of the books that Chuck made.
Yeah, these are, there's two about the Lafayette Escadrille. One, this is about World War I. This one is called Shooting the Front. It's really hard to read. It's very technical. It's about the history of aerial photography. This is one of Herb Kavainui-Kani's books about how the Polynesians got from the Marquesas to Hawaii, and I've had this book for a long time. I've had this map since 1974. People are interested in, this is a National Geographic, people are interested in how canoes navigated and how they were built. This is 1974 edition I still have.
One of the first users of stellar navigation, by the way.
So Chuck,
Stellar guide by the stars.
can I add a connection to your story?
Sure.
So the library has a span of years of the Lafayette's logbooks, handwritten, of
Really?
daily occurrences. The Smithsonian's got the other half. That has been digitized. It also has been transcribed because it was written in cursive. We just got someone to transcribe it 2 months ago. So now we're just figuring out how we're gonna put it online, but we do have it. So if you wanna see it, stop by. I have it in the back room.
Interestingly enough, in 1939, the guy that was the commander of the Lafayette Escadrille in 1908 was still alive, and he was a colonel, and he and another founder of the original escadrille decided to try to start one again in 1939, but it didn't happen.
So these logbooks were found in a trash can in North Island.
Okay?
And so the person
I know.
who found it sold it to the museum for $10,000. So we contacted the Smithsonian, they're like, yeah, we have this half, you go ahead and buy that half, and so, yeah. So, how it got to North Island, I don't know, but,
Well,
Well, you do know that they fly airplanes out of there.
yeah.
Might be a connection.
okay, well, thank you very much, I appreciate your.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. See you next time.